The story of Jamaica's fight for freedom is one of fire, courage, and unbreakable spirit. Long before flags waved in celebration and independence became a reality, there were shadows moving through the dense forests, drums echoing across the mountains, and a determination that refused to be crushed. The Maroon community's escaped African slaves did not simply survive. They fought back, using guerrilla warfare, deep knowledge of Jamaica's rugged terrain, and an unyielding will. They resisted Spanish colonizers and, later, the powerful British Empire. These were people who understood that freedom was not a gift to be received, it was a prize to be earned. With every heartbeat, every strategy, every daring raid. Imagine the forests alive with whispers of rebellion, footpaths known only to the brave, and mountains that hid entire communities of warriors ready to strike at a moment's notice. Their courage sparked a legacy that would shape the island for centuries, a legacy of resilience, ingenuity, and unrelenting hope. The Maroon's story is more than a chapter in history, it is a living testament to what can happen when people refuse to bow under oppression. In this video, we'll journey through the untold stories of Jamaica's wildest secrets, the birth of Maroon societies, the battles that defied empires, and the heroes whose names echo in the hills and valleys even today. From daring escapes to fierce confrontations, you'll witness the island's past like never before, a story of fire and freedom that refuses to be forgotten. If you're ready to step into the shadows of the mountains, uncover the courage of those who shaped a nation, and experience the untamed spirit of Jamaica, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment of this unforgettable journey. The story of Jamaica's Maroons is wild, powerful, and waiting for you. Long before the Maroons carved their freedom into the mountains of Jamaica, the island was home to a people whose lives were intertwined with the rhythm of the land and the sea. The Taino, gentle cultivators and skilled artisans, had built a society that celebrated harmony with nature, crafting intricate carvings, by mastering agriculture, and navigating the turquoise waters in massive canoes, their lives flowing with the seasons and the cycles of the sun. They called the island Jamaica, the land of wood and water, and their villages were thriving communities where time moved with patience, and conflict was rare. Yet, the arrival of Europeans would shatter this balance with unrelenting force, transforming paradise into a place of terror and despair. When Christopher Columbus and his men set foot on the island in 1494, the Taino were met with curiosity, gifts, and a generosity that would be tragically exploited. What began as cautious encounters soon turned into a campaign of domination, as the Europeans imposed demands for gold, forced labor, and submission. The Taino, unarmed and unprepared for the kind of cruelty that would follow, faced unimaginable horrors. Men, women, and children were torn from their homes, subjected to brutality that left scars on both body and spirit, and communities were uprooted as entire populations were enslaved or slaughtered to satisfy the appetite of colonial conquest. Disease, introduced unknowingly by the newcomers, spread like wildfire, striking down thousands who had no immunity, while forced labor in gold mines and plantations drained life from the survivors. Over the decades, the population of the Taino dwindled with shocking speed. Communities that had flourished for centuries were reduced to shadows of their former selves, their sacred objects destroyed, their culture nearly erased. The land that had sung with the voices of the Taino became haunted by absence, a silent testament to the human cost of conquest and exploitation. Yet even in this devastation, threads of resilience remained. Those who survived carried knowledge, stories, and memory into the hills and forests, and their endurance would ripple into the next chapter of the island's history. It was into this scarred landscape that the Maroons would emerge, drawing strength from ancestors who had endured impossible hardship. The forests that once sheltered the Taino became sanctuaries for those fleeing bondage, and the knowledge of survival embedded in the land's hidden paths. The secret springs, the caves and ridge became weapons in the fight against oppression. The tragedies endured by the Taino were not forgotten. They shaped the collective memory of resistance, informing strategies and imbuing communities with the determination to never again submit. The very mountains that had witnessed the near erasure of one people became the stronghold of another, where courage, cunning, and unity forged a legacy of defiance that no empire could extinguish. In tracing the journey from Taino society to Maroon autonomy, one sees the continuity of survival and adaptation, the ways in which memory and suffering transform into resilience, and how the land itself becomes both witness and participant in a struggle for dignity. The horrors the Taino endured cast a long shadow, yet out of that shadow arose a force that would define Jamaica, a people whose determination to resist oppression and claim their freedom would echo across centuries. From the loss of the original inhabitants to the rise of Maroon warriors, Jamaica's history is stitched together by stories of endurance, courage, and the unyielding pursuit of liberation, forming the foundation of a nation that would one day rise from tragedy into independence. As the scars of conquest and the echoes of Taino's suffering lingered across Jamaica, a new chapter of resistance began to take shape in the hidden folds of the island's mountains, where the dense forests and jagged ridges offered both refuge and opportunity for those who would not bow to oppression. From these shadows, two remarkable Maroon societies rose, each with its own character, leaders, and vision for survival and sovereignty. In the east, the Windward Maroons coalesced under the extraordinary guidance of Queen Nanny, a woman whose presence would become legend, whose understanding of the land and its rhythms gave her people a strategic edge that confounded even the most disciplined colonial forces. Her leadership was both spiritual and martial. She trained her warriors in the art of reading the forest, interpreting its sounds and scents as if the mountains themselves whispered secrets to her, and in the use of signals, decoys, and traps that turned the terrain into a weapon more deadly than any musket or cannon. The Windward Maroons, though ethnically diverse and loosely organized at first, found cohesion in Nanny's vision, a blend of ancestral wisdom, tactical genius, and an unshakable belief that freedom was a right worth every risk. Meanwhile, in the west, the Leeward Maroons forged a different path, centered on unity through shared heritage and disciplined organization. Led by Kojo, also known as Kajo, this community drew strength from their African origins, maintaining traditions and martial knowledge passed down from the Gold Coast, blending them into a society capable of both defense and governance. Their cohesion and strategic foresight allowed them to resist the encroaching British settlers with precision, orchestrating ambushes, controlling key mountain passes, and creating fortified settlements that became symbols of unyielding defiance. Unlike the Windward Maroons, whose strength lay in adaptability and intimate knowledge of the land, the Leewards emphasized structure, planning, and the cultivation of a collective identity that could withstand the pressures of war and betrayal alike. The rise of these two societies was not merely a matter of survival. It was a statement, a declaration that enslaved Africans could not only resist but thrive outside the control of empires. Their knowledge of the terrain, combined with an understanding of European military tactics, allowed them to turn pursuit into opportunity, transforming the familiar paths and hidden caves into instruments of strategy that repeatedly frustrated Spanish and British campaigns. Every raid, every escape, every successful defense reinforced the resolve of the Maroons and cemented their reputations as indomitable forces, warriors whose courage inspired both fear and respect. Queen Nanny and Kojo were more than leaders. They were symbols of resistance, embodiments of memory and determination. Through them, the Maroon societies became living proof that the legacy of oppression could be transformed into a legacy of freedom, that the blood and suffering of the Taino and early African captives had not vanished but instead fueled a new wave of defiance. The mountains echoed with their footsteps, the forests hid their communities, and the colonial powers learned the limits of force in the face of intelligence, unity, and courage. In weaving together the stories of the Windward and Leeward Maroons, one sees a tapestry of resilience, a narrative of strategy and spirit, and the emergence of a people who would shape Jamaica's destiny, not through submission, but through unwavering defiance and the unrelenting pursuit of freedom that would echo for centuries to come. Decades of relentless struggle had transformed Jamaica's mountains into theaters of defiance, where every ambush, every raid, and every hidden settlement whispered the unyielding will of the Maroons. The Windward Maroons, guided by the extraordinary leadership of Queen Nanny and the disciplined Leeward Maroons under Kojo, had carved spaces of freedom into the very heart of the island, spaces where colonial authority faltered and traditional hierarchies of power were challenged by sheer courage, knowledge, and unity. The British, accustomed to commanding obedience with fleets, soldiers, and laws, soon realized that these forests and ridges could not be conquered through force alone. Every campaign into the Maroon strongholds met with frustration. Well-laid plans unraveled in the face of hidden paths, cunning traps, and warriors who knew the land better than any outsider could hope to learn. For years, the Empire poured men, weapons, and resources into the hills, yet each expedition seemed to strengthen the Maroons rather than diminish them. Ambushes left entire squads vanished, diseases claimed more European lives than battle, and the intimate knowledge of the terrain turned the natural world into an ally for those who had no choice but to resist. The Maroons' victories were not just military, they were symbolic affirmations that freedom could not be suppressed by the might of empires, that knowledge, strategy, and courage could rewrite the rules imposed by colonizers. This was a lesson that resonated far beyond Jamaica, a reminder that the oppressed could assert sovereignty even under the shadow of global power. Finally, after years of unbroken resistance, the British were forced to recognize a reality they could no longer ignore. Treaties were signed, granting the Maroons land in perpetuity and acknowledging their autonomy, a moment almost unthinkable in the colonial Caribbean where African voices had so often been silenced. These agreements were more than legal documents. They were the tangible recognition of a people who had fought not for survival alone, but for self-determination, dignity, and the right to exist on their own terms. For the Maroons, this was a triumph born from decades of endurance, strategy, and courage, a vindication of the generations who had refused to submit, who had turned despair into action, and who had taught even the most powerful empire that freedom could not be conquered by force. The treaties also marked a turning point in Jamaica's history, setting the stage for the continued struggle for liberty on the plantations and, later, for emancipation and independence. While the Maroons gained security in the mountains, their example inspired countless others to resist, to dream, and to believe in the possibility of autonomy and justice. It was a rare acknowledgement of African sovereignty, a historical anomaly in a world dominated by colonial conquest, and a testament to the enduring power of resilience. Through these agreements, the Maroons transformed their legacy of survival into one of enduring influence, their actions echoing across decades as a warning to those who would underestimate the will of people who knew the value of freedom. In honoring their struggle, the treaties recognized not only their victories in battle, but the unbreakable spirit of a people who had refused to be erased, who had claimed a piece of the world as their own, and whose courage would shape the story of Jamaica for centuries to come. Even as the Maroons secured their autonomy in the mountains and forests of Jamaica, the lowlands told a far grimmer story, where the brutal machinery of plantation life ground relentlessly against the bodies and spirits of the enslaved. The sugar estates, sprawling across the plains and along the coast, were engines of wealth built on pain, where Africans endured long hours under the scorching sun, subjected to the lash, chained to backbreaking labor, and stripped of the dignity of choice. Every day was a test of endurance, every moment a negotiation with survival. Yet beneath the surface of submission, resistance simmered, quiet but unyielding. In secret gatherings, coded messages passed between fields, whispered rhythms of drums carried news and warnings, and subtle acts of defiance sabotaging tools, poisoning crops. Sophia, feigning illness became the language of rebellion. Among these acts, some rose with such intensity that they shook the very foundations of colonial authority, demanding recognition and forcing the empire to confront the unsustainability of its system. Samuel Sharpe, a Baptist deacon whose faith intertwined with strategy, emerged as a figure who could channel this simmering discontent into action. His leadership transformed ordinary workers into a coordinated force, their quiet suffering turning into the largest rebellion Jamaica had ever seen, with tens of thousands rising in unified defiance against the planters. Plantations burned, estates were abandoned, and the colonial administration, accustomed to controlling bodies but not spirits, found itself overwhelmed by a movement that refused to be ignored. Though the rebellion was ultimately suppressed, the shockwaves reached Britain, forcing the empire to acknowledge that the system of bondage it had relied upon for centuries could no longer function without peril to itself. The uprising demonstrated that the struggle for freedom was not confined to the hidden valleys of the Maroons. It was alive in every field, every home, every secret meeting of those who carried within them the memory of oppression and the hope for liberation. It revealed the profound interconnection between the visible victories in the mountains and the persistent resistance on the plantations, a continuum of defiance that challenged the moral and political legitimacy of slavery. Each act of courage, whether in open rebellion or in small daily resistances, chipped away at the structures of control and created the conditions for legislative change. Sharpe's revolt, in particular, crystallized the untenable nature of enslavement, compelling Parliament to face the human cost of its profits and accelerating the path toward emancipation. By the 1830s, Jamaica stood at a crossroads shaped by centuries of resistance, Maroon autonomy, and the relentless courage of the enslaved population in the lowlands. The rebellions, both subtle and large-scale, demonstrated that freedom could not be confined to treaties or secluded communities. It was a force that emerged wherever oppression sought to dominate the human spirit. In this way, the mountains and the plains of Jamaica were united by a common struggle, a story of endurance, strategy, and moral defiance that wove together the Maroons' victories with the persistent, often perilous, resistance of the enslaved. The island's path to emancipation was not a single event, but a tapestry of courage, sacrifice, and determination, each thread strengthening the resolve that would eventually culminate in legal freedom. Even as the journey toward true equality and justice continued beyond the plantation gates. Even after the chains of slavery were legally broken, the promise of freedom remained only partially fulfilled for the people of Jamaica. Emancipation in 1834 and full liberation in 1838 marked the end of one form of bondage, but the legacy of oppression lingered in the fields, towns, and courts of the island. Freedmen found themselves landless, underpaid, and politically marginalized, trapped in a system that had been designed to maintain their subjugation even beyond the plantation gates. Poverty was pervasive, and opportunities for self-determination were scarce. Yet the embers of resistance that had been kindled by Maroon warriors and plantation rebellions continued to glow, waiting for new leaders to fan them into action. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a new generation of thinkers, activists, and organizers began to rise, guided by a vision of dignity, equality, and self-governance. Marcus Garvey, born in 1887, electrified Jamaican consciousness with his call for black pride and self-determination, inspiring people to reclaim their identity, heritage, and destiny. His words resonated far beyond the island, planting seeds of empowerment that would ripple through the decades. Alongside him, figures such as Norman Manley and Alexander Bustamante emerged as architects of political change, mobilizing labor movements, advocating for universal suffrage, and demanding a voice for the Jamaican people in the governance of their own land. Their tireless efforts and unwavering commitment to justice laid the groundwork for the ultimate realization of the freedom that the Maroons, the Taino, and countless enslaved Africans had struggled and died to claim. The journey to independence was long, built upon centuries of struggle and sacrifice, but it was ultimately unstoppable. By the early 1960s, the fervor for self-governance and national identity had become undeniable, permeating every corner of Jamaican life from rallies in Kingston to conversations in small rural communities. Then came the defining moment, August 6, 1962. On that night, the Union Jack was lowered for the last time, and the Jamaican flag ascended into the sky as fireworks illuminated the city. Tens of thousands gathered to witness the birth of a nation forged through resistance, courage, and an unbreakable will. The mountains that had sheltered Maroon warriors for centuries seemed to exhale, as if acknowledging the culmination of a story that had begun with rebellion, suffering, and the unyielding pursuit of freedom. Jamaica's independence was not granted as a gift. It was seized, earned through the collective effort of generations who refused to accept subjugation. It stands as a testament to resilience, a living proof that a people armed with memory, courage, and vision can defy the mightiest empires and shape their own destiny. From the forests where Queen Nanny and Kojo led their warriors to the fields where Samuel Sharpe inspired revolt. From the embattled plains of emancipation to the political awakenings of the 20th century. The story of Jamaica is a saga of endurance, ingenuity, and unbroken spirit. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the wild and unyielding history of Jamaica. If you found this story as inspiring as we did, please make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel for more eye-opening narratives, and share this video with your friends and family. Together, let's continue to explore the remarkable histories that have shaped our world and honor the legacies of those who fought for freedom against all odds. Those who fought for freedom against